Hi kids. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the creation of ethnic studies. You know, they say the last place the colonizer leaves is the mind. Let's speed up that process. Let's get started. So kids, you may have never taken an ethnic studies class yet in school because most people take ethnic studies for the first time when they get to college. Ethnic studies is where we learn about the groups and people that tend to get left out of our history and social studies class, kids. Groups like West Africans, Central Americans, Caribbeans, East Asians, South Asians, South Americans, African Americans, Pacific Islanders, Middle East, and even sometimes some Eastern Europeans. Ethnic studies allows us to study groups in a detailed and interdisciplinary way that not only allows us to look at their traditions and cultures, but allows us to ask about their political and economic experiences, how they overlap with our own, the histories of struggle against different kinds of oppression, and how we can learn from those histories and fight against oppression today. Ethnic studies is about the global solidarity of third world people against the lasting effects of colonialism and imperialism. It has to be revisited again and again throughout our lives, but some people try to limit ethnic studies to one course or a diversity requirement. One course for your entire life. Ethnic studies was a response to area studies, which is a state-backed US-funded area of study that ends up just being a tool for more imperialism and militarism. Kids, I love ethnic studies. Without ethnic studies, there would be no history class with Michael because Michael wouldn't know history. At least not actual history, because history that doesn't account for all of our histories is just a story. Today, ethnic studies is so widespread that we almost take it for granted, but students and faculty still have to fight for funding, courses, respect for its intellectual rigor, and even the existence of ethnic studies itself. This has been true since day one, which brings us to today's story, kids. The very first ethnic studies program was created in 1968 at San Francisco State University and was the product of one of the longest campus protest movements in US history. The fight for ethnic studies was a multiracial, multi-ethnic, community-based team or coalition that was fighting for a broad set of issues, kids. They were led by the Black Student Union, the first ever Black student union in the country, and a multi-ethnic, multiracial student group called the Third World Liberation Front. They also got outside support from local San Francisco community organizers and activists. This was a movement, kids. Student protesters faced police violence, harassment, and imprisonment. Their goals were their demands. They were fighting for students to be removed from the Vietnam War draft, the removal of ROTC from campus, open admissions for students of color, more faculty of color, the return of George Murray, a Black English teacher who had been kicked out for his political views against the war, increase in financial aid, and of course, a college of ethnic studies. These students wanted an ethnic studies that was a space for activism and intellectual work that could address the issues of racism, war, poverty, exploitation of immigrant labor, among other things. And because of protests like this across the country, ethnic studies programs popped up in mass. Kids, we need ethnic studies. Black studies is one of the longest lasting legacies of the Black Power movement. We need ethnic studies long before we get to college. We need to learn about these global histories of struggle in elementary school, in middle school, and in high school, kids. This is not just about diversity. As Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly tells us, when people leave with a Black Studies degree, are we equipping them to not only honor, but to build upon the formation of the discipline? Are they able to speak about the Black experience, which necessarily includes the material conditions of Black people? Are they able to think internationally and to think broadly? This is about being in global solidarity and genuinely understanding the political and social realities of people across the world and pushing against oppression today. It's not about cashing in on the cultural capital of Black and brown people without actually being for Black and brown liberation. Black studies is not just an academic field. It's a lifestyle, kids. As scholar and activist Dr. Melina Abdullah says, your permanent identity is not a student, but you will always be Black. Black Lives Matter.